So today I am reviewing Warlock. We're gonna do the Killers game tomorrow afternoon, but I figured since I already announced I was doing this one today, I was like, you know what? We'll just do this one. So this is the sequel, Warlock the Armageddon. It's a sequel, but it very much it's kind of like if you've seen Evil Dead 2, where that one feels like a prequel. Like if we're gonna be real, not prequel, it feels like a reboot. Like they changed the story a little bit of what happened. Even like the way Ash even gives the girlfriend the necklace is a different actress. It feels like a different retelling. I think this is basically that because the Warlock has a much different. His origin is like much different. And there's even like the whole like because there's like a show because there's druids who have to stop him. Who Kenny's like the main character, and Samantha, she's also a druid. They come together. They're able to stop the Warlock, and also in this one, the Warlock's basically collecting stones. Essentially, that's kind of really all he does in this movie. I like it. It's not the best one. I think the first one's a much better film because I do like though. One thing I do like is this film does have like a Nightmare on Elm Street kind of feel with some of the weird imagery. Like there's a scene he sends a guy in like a mirror and he's like locked in. He's like all these weird creatures and there's some really cool like set designs in this film. And Julian Sands kills it again. So I like it for the most part. I think it's a solid sequel. I'm going to see if I don't know if there's one after this one. I think this is it. But it's very much sequel and title only because it's much different. The origin story is much different compared. I don't think there's a third one though. I think that's it. I think there's only two. So overall, I give this one. I think I gave the first one like an 8. I give this one like a 7, not a 7. I think Julian Sands is what kills it. There's some cool kills. There's a scene where to get one of the stones, he convinced because I don't know if the lady, because she's like some model, right? Like she runs a model. And he basically gets he collects crystals in this. Basically, that's all he really does in this film. And then he kills one of the models by after giving him because she knows the lore. So basically, he has to convince her that he's a warlock, so he shows her powers, and he does. But he ends up killing her by dropping her, and she like falls through the roof and the ceiling. Which I'll admit that scene was pretty well done. Like, and you see like a big ass giant part of the glass in her. And it's pretty brutal. So like I will say that. The love interest. The only thing I don't like is I don't care about the lead. I would have rather Kenny's dad. Steve Kahan. You might recognize he's the sergeant in Lethal Weapon, or the chief in the Lethal Weapon movies. I would have rather him just been the main character that just knows the lore. Him and his friend know the lore about the Warlock, and that's what it should have been. I think that'd been my only change. I didn't like the whole idea of making he has to kill his son, but basically all he does is just to give him. It's essentially to give him his powers. Start setting up Kenny because Kenny's one of the Kenny and Samantha come together. Basically, their magic can come together to take out the Warlock and stop Satan. And I will say another criticism I do have with the film. The film does kind of feel like a little bit like two different films. Like when you're focusing on Kenny and Samantha, it's like a love story up in this weird town where weird things happen, and because they think like his dad is like a Satanist. You know, there's a scene where like all these birds die, and because the pastor initially kind of helps out Will and keeps lets him be around, but only if he isn't around his daughter. Because Samantha's his daughter. But I just feel like this movie, other than that, the movie is fine, but it doesn't. It's not a sequel at all. It very much is a new origin story. It really is. It's just the same actor, but essentially it's far different film compared to the first one. I also feel like they do go a bit. I'm not gonna say horror, but they do like because I think the first one, it wasn't just a straight up horror film. I mean, it is, but I feel like the first one did try to have more of a fantasy element. This one I feel like does go more horror, like where he is more just going around killing people. They're showing you more scary imagery than like in the first one. I feel like there was still that element of fantasy there, right? There's no fantasy in this one besides him being a warlock, but really, I'd argue it's more of a horror film than it goes more horror than I would say fantasy compared to the first one, where it still had that fantasy element. Oh, the final act's all right. It's an okay film. I don't know if I were to watch Warlock again, which I would watch Warlock again. I like the first one. I would only watch the first one. I think I'd only watch this one if I'm in the mood. I don't hate it. Like, I still think a 7 out of 10 is still decent. I just think I almost feel like I prefer the medieval. I like the more fantasy tone the first one has. Like, yeah, it's still a horror, but there's a fantasy element in there still. I feel like they kind of took the fantasy element out and just went all horror, which is fine, but I think for a Warlock film, I think it makes more sense for it to have like almost both tones. So, but overall, it's a 7 out of 10. It's not the worst thing in the world. Julian Sands still he's like the best thing in this movie for sure. I could have done without Katie and Samantha. Their whole love stuff, I didn't buy them as a couple. They didn't have any chemistry. You didn't really care for them as a couple. I didn't personally. Like, to me, they were just there. But yeah. So tomorrow, the plan is sometime tomorrow, I will review, like, it'll probably be during the day. I will review Killer's Game, and then on Tuesday evening will be Batman and Robin. Or Wednesday at the latest, but yeah. And then Wednesday, Pure Luck. And yeah, so anyway, let's get into Warlock, the Armageddon, which is, the name's terrible, because really, there's no Armageddon. They don't really allude to Armageddon, besides, I guess, Satan coming. That's it. Alright. Let's get into this. So, it starts, we basically get a different origin. You see the druids, which were not mentioned at all in the first one, stop the rise of Satan's son using 6 magical rune stones, which are going to be real. I will say the stones, they don't really explain. So I guess that's another criticism I have. The stones are definitely just MacGuffins. They're just things the bad guy needs. Here's the thing. I don't have a problem inherently with MacGuffins if like, you at least have an explanation Um, if you have an explanation for what it is, so I can care as a viewer. You know, like, because at the end of the day, I don't have a problem with something being a MacGuffin if you explain it. But when it's just a MacGuffin, you don't explain it. That's what I feel like the Stones are in this movie. They don't really explain it. They're just, the most you get is he needs them all. So I guess to wake Ray Satan, but that's it. That there's no war, there's really no explanation past that. And while I like Steve Kahan in this movie, he kind of is. They do treat him as the exposition dump at times. Like, oh, he's the guy who's going to tell his son. Because they manage to defeat the Warlock. But because, I guess they're in hoods, Christians think they're satanic, which I didn't need that element in the movie. That's one of the things, too. It felt like two different movies because when Will and Kenny are in this town, they're treated as outcasts because they're druids. But because the town thinks they're Satanists. And Ted Ellison, who's Samantha's dad, who is a druid, but he basically, he wants to keep it quiet because he's a reverend now. Or a priest, not a reverend, he's a priest. So, but he does protect them, but only if his son he wants to keep Will's son away. But so, and here's the other problem I have. The scene where, there's a scene, he's just, Kenny, who's the son, you're introduced to him, he gets bullied and all that. Then he's talking to this girl, Samantha, who's like his love interest, who, I don't feel like they had any chemistry at all. It just, and now I know it just seems like I'm shitting on the movie now. I still think it's solid. I just, like, I definitely have some criticism. I didn't feel like I needed this element in the movie. You could have just had Kenny be a druid by himself. You didn't need the daughter. I felt like that was forced. So you could have a love thing. And the scene where you just randomly, Will comes up to his son and then just shoots him. Which is like, what? But then they bring him back with the druid magic to become a druid warrior. So that's why. But I'm like, did you have to kill him? That was kind of weird. I was just like, what? Why'd you just shoot your son? That was so out of nowhere. I was like, what? But then he brings it back, and then basically, Amanda Sloan, who's like this businesswoman, she has one of the stones that, because I guess it's passed down to her, and then it activates, and that's when Warlock, who's Satan's son in this, even though there's no mention of that in the original. Like, this really is a reboot. It essentially, it's like almost like, it might as well be Warlock 1 if they did it differently. It's almost like a reboot if it was a sequel, because it doesn't feel like a sequel at all, besides having the same actor. That's it. Like, even the way they have to defeat him's different. The way they have to, the whole stones thing, that's not in the original at all. And in the way she gives birth, because yeah, she gets pregnant rapidly and gives birth. It felt like kind of like very Freddy to me a little bit, just some of the imagery. And then yeah, he ends up killing her so he can compete with his father. He basically and his father tells him to look for the other stones, and that's basically what Warlock does in the entire film, is just look for stones. And then throughout the film, Kenny basically just starts training, and him and Amanda gets powers too, but initially she turned, obviously she's not against it, but she thinks the shit's weird, but eventually she accepts it. Then they have sex, and basically that's then while this is happening, you do get a really cool scene where throughout the film, Warlock's just collecting the stones, and he's killing people pretty brutally, which is pretty good. The one scene where he takes it from this model lady, just drops her because he's like floating to show her his powers. He's basically said, because I think she knows about the story, and he says, "I am the Warlock." She doesn't believe him. He then takes her to the roof to show her his powers, and when he does, he gets the stone, but then he kills her, drops her through the building, like through the roof, and she dies pretty brutally. It was a pretty good death. Like, and then he goes to like I'm gonna say a circus, someplace where like a freak show. I don't know where exactly he goes. You see these weird outlandish characters, and because they have the stone, he kills them too. One of them locking in this weird, like, I don't know what to call it, dream world. And so that stuff's entertaining. Though there is a scene where I guess it's like voodoo. They have some kind of thing like Will's friend who you see throughout, who also is a druid, has this thing that I get. It's like, think voodoo, right? That he was stabbing into the thing, and that's basically it was actually injuring the warlock. So it's some kind of thing that I don't know if it's his skin. I don't know what it is. They don't really explain. I just took it as it's some kind of thing that's able to affect the actual wizard. And then so you had to kill somebody to basically heal. And then essentially he gains pretty much all the stones because he ends up killing his friend. And then the film's pretty quick too. I will say that. It's not a long film. It goes pretty quick. I mean, I would have rather them just did a straight up direct sequel instead of doing this weird reboot thing. Because I don't know. I love this reboot. I still think it's still a solid film. Because Julian Sands just he still brings it as the Warlock, but like I said, I feel like they went more of a horror direction this time around. Because the first one is horror, but I feel like the first one, because it has the element of destroying the world, and I felt like too, it played into the fantasy element too. Like I didn't feel like it was just straight up horror, where I feel like this one was, and that's fine. But I don't know. I like the fantasy element too of it all. I think that's why, because it was able. I love the way they blended the fantasy and horror element. Then I feel like they abandoned the fantasy element too. And then in the town when you're with Will, it feels like a different movie because this town, in which I get it because they explained it earlier. The Christians think the Druids are Satanists, but I felt like it wasn't explored better, or maybe explained better. So it felt like I was watching a different movie. I felt like I was watching like is this like Children of the Corn but with adults? Like you're in this weird town with these weird people. That's what it felt like to me, until the Warlock comes back in the end. So, but he ends up. I think Will dies too. I'm pretty sure Will dies. Yeah. But Kenny and Samantha, they manage to defeat the Warlock, and he ends up stopping Satan, and they're defeated. Satan's like almost about to rise, and then yeah. So pretty much that's the film. Like really, that's it. It's not the worst. It's all right. Like I said, it's a 7 out of 10. Maybe more 6.5. The more I think about it, 6.5. I think I'll go with that. 6.5 out of 10. I think there's some good. Julian Sands does really kill it again, but I don't love that they made it an origin. They changed the origin. I would have rather just been. They should have just did a direct sequel instead of sequel and name only. But it's basically a reboot. I didn't really care for the whole Druid angle. I think the dad should have been the main character, not the son. The son just was boring. I found the son kind of boring. I found when he was on the screen, because his whole thing is, I want to go to San Francisco. That's it. Until he gets the powers. And even when he gets the powers, I don't even feel like there's that much of a change. So it's just... like, I don't know. I think if they just cut that element out, and it just been, maybe if they just simplified it and just had it be Will versus the Warlock, have that I get it. He's older. Maybe they felt like you had to have that character who's older and pass on. I get it, but I just think Chris Young, who played Kenny, I just found him boring. I didn't really care for his character. Same with the Samantha too. I didn't really care for them as a couple. They should have just simply just made it. Have Will be like the Loomis in this kind of movie. Like, he knows about the world. Him and his friend trying to stop the Warlock. That's what the film should have been. I think it would have been better. But I still think Julian Sands really does carry it. I do like some of the set pieces, especially that mirror scene. And I actually do think some of the kills are pretty creative. So that's why I'm giving it a 6.5. I still think there's some decent stuff in here. I just think there's a couple things that bog it down. The crystals are basically just essentially just MacGuffins. You get a little explanation. They're clearly tied to raising Satan, but that's it. That's the most you get. So, like, I think there's a couple good things in this film. It's just, I think if you cut Kenny and Samantha, I think this movie goes up. Like I said, it does feel like not necessarily two different movies, but you could tell there's like two different directions they wanted to go. So, and I also don't really love. I'm gonna say it again. I don't really love that they changed the origin. I think his origin in the first one's better than what they did here. But anyway, so 6.5 out of 10. I thought the score was still good. Some good kills. It's just some couple things holding it back from being a flat out like really good film. But it's an alright one. I would probably still only really watch the first one though. But yeah. But other than that, tomorrow I will be I'm gonna get the Killers game done. I'm gonna try to do that like sometime during the day. Or in the morning. And then in the evening I will be doing Batman and Robin. At worst, I'll do it Wednesday morning. But yeah, Batman and Robin. That's gonna be fucking interesting. And I think I already know what the title's gonna be. It's definitely gonna be one of Mr. Freeze's puns. It's either gonna be Let's Kick Some Ice or What Killed the Dinosaurs. It has to be one of those two. I just think one of those. I'll figure it out, but it's gonna be one of those two. It's definitely gonna be that though. But I kind of can't wait till next Tuesday because Batman Begins. It's gonna be fun. That's gonna be fun to do. So, but anyways, 6.5 out of 10. This isn't the worst thing. I will say I'm gonna probably title the video "Okay Sequel." I think that's probably what I'll title it. Yeah. So, anyways, I'm gonna get ready to call it here. This Saturday, Hidden Down Podcast, we were going to be talking about the Vince McMahon documentary that's going to be coming out on Netflix. Or I guess technically it'd be tomorrow, because it's Tuesday. It's almost 2 a.m. here. It's Tuesday, so technically, yeah, tomorrow on Wednesday. The Vince documentary, we'll be talking about that. So basically, probably the entire stream, or at least a lot of the stream, we're going to be talking about that. So be prepared for that. I can't wait for it. It makes my profile pic useful now. But anyways, guys. Warlock, the Armageddon's okay. Okay, sequel. Talk to y'all later.